A potem to, co pan powie, to ja powiem tutaj w mikrofon. Słyszy pan coś, co ja mówię?
Teraz tak słyszę. Tylko tak niech pani mówi, jak teraz. A może sobie założę to...
Ja muszę powiedzieć, że panu mikrofon włącza.
Ustroić, to będę lepiej słyszał.
Okay. Shall we? All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Žantovský, and I'm the executive director of the Václav Havel Library in Prague, and actually the Václav Havel Library, together with the Forum 2000, are the organizers of this program and partners throughout the conference. And the subject of this panel is very topical for me. It's about Václav Havel. It will have been 30 years ago in February when Havel addressed the joint session of the US Congress and introduced some ideas to the congressmen and the senators that they were not so much accustomed to hear very often. And in his speech to the session, he said, among other things, that the only genuine core of all human actions, if they are to be moral, is responsibility. Responsibility to something higher than my family, my country, my firm, my success. And it is this concept of responsibility that I believe is under siege in politics today, and when you invoke it, you often risk being seen as naive or worse. And so my question to our panelists, and I will first introduce them, and the first of our panelists is Hayuki Hana-Tulien, and I'm aware I'm butchering the name, but I tried, I rehearsed, I practiced to no avail. Anyway, Hanuki, she's the president of the Protection of Rights Without Borders in Armenia, and this is the relevant information for you. Then we have our old friend Adam Michnik, who's the editor-in-chief of Gazeta Wyborcza, this little Polish newspaper that you may have never heard about. And we have another old friend, Vesna Pusic, who was the foreign minister of Croatia and a practicing politician for many, many years now. And then, last but certainly not least, we have Lapsang Sangay, who's the head of the Central Tibetan administration and also now a good acquaintance. So welcome all. And let me ask the first question to all of you. How does the politics in your country or in your region conform to this criterion of responsibility that Havel set up there for all of us to look at? Hanuki?
Yeah. Thank you. So I will pronounce my name to make it sure how it is in Armenian. So my name is Haikuhi, which is simply means Armenian woman. So that's easy to memorize and pronounce. So what I would like to share as a thoughts about responsibility and what is the modern tendency for political responsibility, I think it's very decisive for for global world. What we are observing, politicians are exercising power without responsibility. And I think these tendencies are quite very well spread all over the world, but also in our region, in our Eastern Partnership region and in Armenia. But also what we observe, how citizens are trying to hold their politicians accountable and somehow to put this responsibility on them is through the civilian resilience and also through the protests that we are observing recently. So the previous session was somehow demonstrated that when the politicians are not exercising this responsibility burden on them, then citizens come up for putting them on pressure for this responsibility.
Thank you, Haikui. Got it right now, yeah? Now, Adam, we just taking in the results of the parliamentary elections in Poland. Don't look so sad. How does the concept of responsibility stand in Polish politics, media, civil society today?
Odpowiedzialność ma dwa znaczenia. Po pierwsze, to jest moja odpowiedzialność za to, co się dzieje w moim kraju.
Responsibility has two meanings. The first meaning is the responsibility I have for what is happening in my country.
A drugie to jest odpowiedzialność ludzi, którzy sprawują władzę za to, co robią.
And the second meaning is the responsibility or accountability of people who are in power for what they do.
Więc o tej pierwszej odpowiedzialności to nie ja powinienem mówić, tylko inni powinni mówić.
As far as the first meaning, the first kind of responsibility is concerned, namely my personal responsibility, it is not my place to cover it. I think somebody else should talk about me.
Ja czuję się odpowiedzialny.
I feel responsible for what I do.
I mogę powiedzieć, że tak jak potrafiłem, starałem się zapobiegać tym złym procesom, które zachodzą w moim kraju, ale też i w innych krajach.
And I tried as best as I could to prevent all the bad processes and tendencies that we witnessed in my country and also abroad.
Jestem redaktorem gazety i pisaliśmy o tym, co w Słowacji robił Mečiar.
I am the editor-in-chief of the newspaper you mentioned, and as a newspaper we tried to cover what Mečiar was doing in Slovakia.
Pisaliśmy o tym, co w Chorwacji robił Tudjman, a w Serbii Milošević.
We covered what Tudjman was doing in Croatia, what Milošević was doing in Serbia.
Dużo pisaliśmy o Tybecie.
We had large coverage of Tibetan situation.
Dalai Lama spotykał się z nami.
We met with Dalai Lama.
Wreszcie pisaliśmy o Armenii i o tym ormiańskim cudzie, kiedy lud obalił skorumpowany rząd.
And we also covered Armenia, the incredible, miraculous situation when it was the people who actually managed to overcome the government that was not doing what they should.
To, co jest niepokojące, to jest to, że w naszych krajach zwycięża model pełzającego odchodzenia od demokracji.
What worries me and what is worrisome is that in our countries what we see is that people are refraining slowly, step by step, moving away from democracy.
Klasykiem gatunku jest prezydent Łukaszenka.
I think Lukashenko is a classic example here.
Putin jest jego plagiatorem.
Putin is sort of a plagiator.
A Orban i Kaczyński
He's a
są
copycat.
plagiatorami Putina.
And Orban and Kaczynski are copycats of Putin.
Ale nie jest to tylko fenomen krajów postkomunistycznych.
But it's not only in post-communist countries that you see that.
Wtedy, kiedy Václav Havel formułował swoje idee, zupełnie inaczej wyglądał demokratyczny Zachód.
At the time when Havel was forming his ideas and notion, the Western democracies looked completely different.
Nie było Brexitu,
There was no Brexit,
nie było alternatywy dla Niemiec,
there was no alternative,
alternatyw für Deutschland.
there was no alternative for Germany,
Nie było Salviniego,
there was no Salvini,
a przede wszystkim nie było Trumpa.
and there was no Trump, obviously.
Trump zmienił wszystko.
Trump was a game changer.
I w tej chwili nad światem wisi widmo wielkiego sojuszu lidera z Pekinu, lidera z Moskwy i lidera z Waszyngtonu.
And now the world is faced or overshadowed by this potential huge friendship and association of the leader from Beijing, from Moscow and from Washington.
To jest koalicja antydemokratyczna.
It's an anti-democratic coalition.
To jest gorzej niż pakt Mołotow-Ribbentrop, gorzej niż Monachium, gorzej niż Jałta.
It's worse than Ribbentrop-Molotov Treaty, it's worse than Munich.
I odpowiedzialność nasza jest szukać odpowiedzi na pytanie, jak się temu przeciwstawić.
And it is our goal, our job and our responsibility to find a question what to do about it, how to prevent it.
Wonderful. Vesna, on to you.
As for the responsibility and this whole notion that Havel brought to politics in general, not only to Eastern Europe, certainly not only to Czechia or Czechoslovakia at that time, but really to the world, and it worked for a while. Unfortunately, I would say, if I had to answer in one short sentence, this responsibility for something that's bigger than yourself, that's bigger than your cause, that's bigger than your country, it turned into the exact opposite. I don't see politicians, certainly in general, I wanted to say in our part of the world, but actually in general, being responsible even to their countries. They're, I would say, mostly responsible or feel responsible for their parties. This is how far they will go. And whatever is not good for my party is out. Whoever is not for my party or from my party is out. And this is becoming seriously dangerous. It's becoming seriously dangerous, I would say, and here I would follow something that Adam has said, because regardless of what was happening on the day-to-day basis, we always, all of us had this feeling that there is some kind of standard out there. Certainly for us in Eastern Europe, standard was Havel, but he's gone. Globally, America was a kind of standard. But now you have no place to turn. We all believed that institutions would be way stronger. They proved not to be that strong, and they proved to actually behind this smokescreen of showmanship, the institutions are being deconstructed, the old stable institutions. What are we going to do? We've only started 30 years ago to build these things. So I think we really need to start rethinking not only basic concepts, but we have to start rethinking something that Havel also introduced, and this is think for ourselves, actually rely on ourselves. There is no them anymore, not even in the positive sense. And there is this famous Teresa Taranska's book called Them, where she speaks of the old nomenclatura and she did the interviews of the old nomenclatura, and everybody was talking about them. In other words, it wasn't us, it was somebody else. Well, in a funny way, this, I feel, is now happening to us. There is no more them. We are them.
Well, we may get back to that later, but first, Lobsang Sangay, is this concept of responsibility in a different part of the world, in a different political context, is it even relevant? Is it important? Please.
As you can see, I'm the only non-European person who's tested on European leader Václav Havel on human responsibility. But perhaps I will be the one who will give a affirmative yes answer, because in our part of the world, at least in the Tibetan world, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is our leader, and actually he is the twin brother of Václav Havel in his philosophy, in his approach. You talked about human responsibility, which you defined it as beyond one person, beyond nation, and beyond cause. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama has written a book called Universal Responsibility. So every person, a leader, should always think of universe and humanity as priority before deciding on your own family, on your own community, even your own nation and region. So yes, Václav Havel's twin brother, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, follows human responsibility and universal responsibility. And it's not just theory. Our movement is based on nonviolence. Again, it's thinking of others. Our administration, the movement is run on democratic basis, democracy in exile, which is very unique and never happened before. And it is also a party-less democracy, because we believe that political parties often fight for their party's interests over national or regional interests. Hence, if you get rid of political parties, you take the self and you take them out and you become we. So even in our schools, the values we are taught is always others before self. Hence, it's a problem now. Politicians don't take responsibilities, business leaders don't take responsibilities, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama has found, in a way, he's indicating the problem lies with the values and the principle intrinsic and inherent in human beings. Hence, where is the fault? In the education system. In the modern education system, emphasis is on your ambition and your personal success. Hence, he has come out with this education curriculum called SEAL learning, which is social, emotional, and ethical learning. Because nowadays, people are socially imbalanced, emotionally disturbed, and ethically questionable. These are never addressed at the school level. Once they become a good student, they become successful professionals, successful leader and business people, but they are not good human beings. Now, how can you make a leader who is successful but also a good human being? So for which we need to educate them at their school level how to be socially balanced, emotionally balanced, and ethically right. Once you do that, then once you become a leader, either political or business leader, you will be a leader, a true definition of leader. Leader essentially means when an ordinary person does something extraordinary. That's called leadership. And that's what Václav Havel is looking for. Someone who can think beyond oneself, beyond one's country, and beyond one's community for the universe and for the humanity. So that's what we should be moving towards.
Thank you so much. Well, that sounds like a wonderful recipe, but let's get back on the ground and let's make this a little bit more interesting, because we are running a risk here of extolling and praising responsibility as a concept and then complaining about how little of it we can find in the world around us. But we who are fortunate enough to live in democracies, have the voters to contend with, the people. And the question is responsibility what the voters are looking for? I mean, in the olden days, you could argue that, yes, people expected their leaders to be responsible, not to waste the public money, not to steal for themselves, not to start stupid, unnecessary wars, etc., etc. But is this what the voters are looking for today? Or are they looking for entertainment? If you look at some of our recent leaders, are they looking for entitlements? Or are they looking to be left alone? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to enforce responsibility in politicians if the voters, unless the voters insist on it. Do they insist on it?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I may, I think here we should also discuss another challenge that is somehow coming because of these advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and algorithmic decision-making systems are now targeting population, where the question who is taking responsibility to challenge and to hold politicians accountable for their promises is somehow missing. So what we are facing currently, these micro-targeting instruments that are used by politicians during the campaign somehow establishes this collective problem where individuals are using their own responsibility to challenge how and what should be done by myself as a responsible citizen and how I can somehow contribute in creating this social foundation for the society to preserve rule of law, democracy, but also somehow to have my say in developing the public policy. So here what we see, and it was also already so well exercised in many countries during the elections, what we faced, these micro-targeted politicians use the group of people, manipulating them through this algorithmic decision-making system and through somehow influencing on their decision to vote. But when it comes to the outcomes, we already have a system, we already have politicians elected, then who is challenging them or who is enforcing them to apply the policies or the programs that they were campaigning for before the election. So here we see that this collective problem somehow deprives an individual from the responsibility to challenge and to even raise these kind of questions. And now also what we face, who is taking responsibility for these algorithmic decision-making processes? Who is standing behind all these? And who is somehow trying to prevent influence and manipulation of voters through these new technological instruments? And here I don't see, unfortunately, that now as moral agents or as a member of societies, we are trying to preserve and somehow to secure this concept of rule of law and democracy through exercising our right to participate, but also to make our governments and politicians accountable for decision-making.
I think if you look at if there's a metrics and measurement, as per the Václav Havel's philosophy of human responsibility, perhaps we have failed in the last 30 years. The voter registration and participation in all the major democracies have decreased and continues to decrease.
True.
Now, if you listen to the millennials, even if you listen to Greta Thunberg, I think she's scolding elder generation right, left, and center for all the destructions in the climate change and the global warming, for failing them. Right? And also the millennials' mantra is YOLO. You only live once. That means they have given up on the elder generation leadership, be it on media or politics or business. They say you only live once, have fun in this life, don't worry anything else. So the fact that the millennials' mantra is YOLO, you only live once, I think it's an issue of moral crisis that we have reached. So we really have to dig deep down as to the approaches. I think it's not simply institutions or legal system or, even media perhaps. For example, in the US, there was a campaign finance reform, how to restrict, lobbies' donation to political parties. And there's one provision which said the politicians should not sit with lobbies and eat dinner and get donation. And what did the politicians do? They went to cafeteria and did not sit, but stood, have coffee, and took the donation anyways, you see. So they always find loopholes in the system and laws. So hence, it's an issue of moral crisis and the values. So I think we have to start with the new education system. We have to start with the new political system. As I said, a partyless democracy is the best way to move forward.
Okay. Anyone else wants to?
I want to, but I don't want to take it from Adam.
Vesna, please.
You want to go first? Go first.
Są tutaj dwa poziomy. Pan Lobsang Sangaj proponuje taką refleksję filozoficzno-egzystencjalną.
I think there are two levels of the problem here. The first level is what Mr. Lobsang Sangay said, and it's a philosophical and existential approach.
Ona jest w moim przekonaniu nieprzekładalna na język konkretnej polityki.
And I think it's not possible to translate it into the language of a very specific politics.
Mnie ona jest bliska jako pewna lekcja, bym powiedział, pielęgnowania własnego sumienia, własnej duszy.
I feel very strongly about what you said about your words. I really identify with it. I believe it's a good lesson in taking good care of your conscience and of your soul.
Natomiast Havel próbował zastosować swoje zasady etyczne w konkretnej polityce.
But what Havel was trying to do was to apply his ethical principles in a very specific political environment.
I robił to w dwóch różnych sytuacjach.
And he did it in two different situations.
Najpierw, jeszcze jako pisarz, nazwijmy to dysydent.
First, it was when he was a writer, let's call him a dissident writer.
I z tego okresu pochodzą jego dwa fundamentalne teksty. List do Havla, do Husaka i Siła bez siły. Bez siły. Moc bez mocy.
And there are two major texts from this period. The first one was the letter to Husak and the power of the powerless.
No i tu można powiedzieć, że Havel był dość bliski Dalajlamie, tak jak bliski Dalajlamie był Sokrates.
And one could say that he was really close in his writings to Dalai Lama, the same way as Socrates was close to Dalai Lama.
Ale nagle Sokrates przeobraził się w Peryklesa. Zdobywa władzę, jest prezydentem.
But then suddenly Socrates turned to Pericles. He turned to power, to the president.
I trzymając się swoich zasad etycznych, Havel tracił popularność w czeskim społeczeństwie.
And since he became the president, Havel, who wanted to stick to his ethical principles, became less and less popular with Czech society.
Dlatego, że Havel był permanentnym wyrzutem sumienia.
He was this permanent, unclear conscience for the Czech society.
Ja to świetnie znam z Polski. W Polsce było tak samo.
And I know it very well from Poland. We had the same situation.
W Rosji to samo było z Sacharowem.
Sakharov.
Andrzej Sacharow.
The same happened in Russia with Sakharov.
Ja pamiętam, jak przyjechałem do Belgradu w 90 roku, to nie spotkałem nikogo, kto by mówił dobrze o Gilasie.
I remember when I went to Belgrade in the 1990s, in 1990, nobody would speak well of Gilas.
A przecież Gilas był pierwszy, który wybrał drogę walki bez przemocy.
And he was the first one who opted for the non-violent fight.
Odrzucił całą nomenklaturę komunistyczną
He rejected the entire communist nomenclature.
i odwołując się do własnego sumienia, zaczął dyktaturę krytykować.
And started to criticize dictatorship, referring to his own conscience.
I właściwie relacja między Gilasem a Tito to jest sztuka Szekspira.
And he could write a Shakespeare drama just covering the relationship between Gilas and Tito.
To były różne koncepcje odpowiedzialności.
There were two different takes on responsibility and accountability.
Tito był zdania, że musi trzymać twardą dyktaturę.
Tito was for strong dictatorship.
On miał przekonanie, kiedy się zbuntował przeciwko Stalinowi, że musi założyć Goli Otok. To był taki jugosławiański gułag. No.
He was sure that he was supposed to start his own gulags once he opposed Stalin.
I mówił, jeżeli aby tego nie zrobił, to cała Jugosławia to byłby gułag, no, gdyby wygrał Stalin.
And he would say that if he didn't do that, then the entire Yugoslavia would turn into one big gulag, provided that Stalin had won.
I to była jego koncepcja odpowiedzialności.
That was his take on accountability and responsibility.
A Gilas mówił nie. To, co wy robicie, to jest okłamywanie ludzi. To jest zniewalanie ludzi. Wy mówicie o wyzwoleniu, a szykujecie im zniewolenie.
And what Gilas would say is, no, you shouldn't do that. What you do is essentially you lie to people, you imprison them instead of liberating them.
Ja o tym bardzo często myślę, kiedy porównuję dwie koncepcje odpowiedzialności intelektualisty u Sołżenicyna i u Sacharowa.
I think about it very often when I compare two different takes or notions of responsibility, the one by Solzhenitsyn, the intellectualist, and the Sakharov one.
Havel pokazał, że można w polityce być przyzwoitym człowiekiem.
What Havel did, he showed us that you can be a decent person even if you're a politician.
To było rzadkie.
It was a very rare thing.
Thank
Yes, indeed. That's
you.
nice.
Thank you very much. I've spent about 25 years being an academic and 20 years being a politician, and have seen it from inside. And like all the other professions or things you could do, there are very different people who actually decide to be involved in politics. But I always believed that, especially in small countries, as many people as possible should take at least some time out of their lives to actually be politicians. And don't fool yourself. You guys are also politicians, only in the broader sense. You don't stand for elections, but you introduce new issues. Politics in the narrow sense, you cannot be as brave, I don't mean in political sense, but in the sense of needing votes, but you therefore get elected and stand in the elections and can come into a position to actually change something. However, I would like to introduce three concepts, and I will not explain a lot, and then if you want, you can come back to me for that. And these three concepts are, just briefly, that populism is new totalitarianism. I know there is my friend John Keane somewhere here who disagrees and thinks that it's new despotism. But I think it's new totalitarianism because it goes for the emotions. It actually goes for the feeling, in other words, for the entire person. It has this same, how can I say, the same adulation of the leader, same combination of self-pity and self-righteousness. It also has this mushy sentimentality towards us, whoever us are, and cold indifference towards them. Them can be another nation, them can be immigrants, whoever. So I think it's closer to totalitarianism. The other thing is, how do voters react? The voters are not very interested in responsibility and accountability at the moment, although if you ask them directly, they would say yes, 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 but this is not what they vote on. They vote on one hand, this entertainment element, and on another level, they vote out of frustration and rage. And there they have a point, because they have gone through a period of political cynicism, of social disrespect, and of economic inequality. And my third point is that equality is such an important political concept, is such an important concept for democracy. Equality, of course, defined as political equality, has over time changed its content. And today, for instance, through social media, through prodding by populist leaders, you have people feeling much more competent in their opinion about vaccination, for instance, than about voter suppression. And if you look at the social media, there will be way more and heated debate over vaccination than over voter suppression, meaning that political equality has been substituted with a fake concept of equality in knowledge, in competences, in things that you cannot be equal in order to sort of create a smoke screen so people wouldn't notice that in things that you can be equal in, you are not equal any longer.
All right. You now hinted at another concept that is closely linked to responsibility, and that's accountability. I mean, responsibility is an empty word without accountability. And for Václav Havel, it existed on two planes. One was the metaphysical plane. He had this concept of the record of the book in which all our deeds are inscribed and will one day be judged. He was not a very religious person, but this is a concept that appears in more than one religion. And then he believed in the accountability in this world, and not necessarily accountability for crimes or illegal acts committed, but political accountability. You try to do something, you don't succeed, you resign. I mean, as we know, he tried to fight the split of Czechoslovakia into two countries by arguing, debating, proposing, drafting legislation, etc., etc. He failed, and he felt duty-bound to resign because he failed politically. These days, something like this happens, the politicians will lawyer up, as they put it, and the next thing you know, you have this endless argument in courts and everywhere. I have a lot of respect for Israeli politics, because this is one country I know about where there is an emerging tradition of sending their prime ministers to jail after they finish in office. Whether this is worth following or not, you know,
Us too.
Vesna.
Us too.
Yeah, okay, I have another vote. So, but do the current legal and political systems in our country make accountability possible? I mean, is there a foolproof way, or at least a plausible way to you know, call our politicians to be accountable? I don't know. And this may be the question for you, Adam, first and foremost.
Ja bym bardzo chętnie kilku polityków w Polsce widział w więzieniu.
I would be more than happy to see a few Polish politicians in prison.
Ale nie dlatego, że są politykami, tylko dlatego, że popełnili przestępstwa.
But not simply because they're politicians, but because they actually committed crimes.
Na pytanie Miszy Żantovskiego nie ma dobrej odpowiedzi.
There's no good answer to your question.
Z jednej strony polityka nie może być logiką zemsty.
On one hand, politics cannot be a tool for revenge.
Jeżeli polityka się staje sposobem na rewanż, na odwet, na zemstę, to jest droga do unicestwienia demokracji, bo demokracja jest pluralizmem i dialogiem.
If politics becomes a tool for revenge, then it will annihilate democracy, because democracy is the place where pluralism and dialogue prevail.
Natomiast nie może być tak, że politycy to jest ta kasta ludzi wyjętych spod prawa.
But we cannot accept the reality where politicians are actually above law. They are a certain caste above law.
Jeżeli ty ukradniesz, czy ja ukradnę, to pójdziemy do więzienia. A politykom wolno kraść.
So if I steal something and you steal something, we go to jail. But what happens to them?
W moim kraju niedawno prezes Najwyższej Izby Kontroli został zdemaskowany, że jakimś gangsterom wynajął dom, który oni przekształcili w burdel.
It's not long ago that in Poland, the president of the Superior Control Regulatory Office was actually revealed. It was revealed that he was letting his own property, his own house, to a gangster group, which the group turned his house, into a brothel.
Znaczy, czy to możliwe jest, żeby na czele najważniejszej instytucji kontrolującej innych stał notoryczny przestępca?
Is it at all possible to have a notorious criminal heading the most important control and regulatory office in the country?
Ja na to pytanie nie mam jasnej odpowiedzi.
Okay.
So there's no clear answer to your question.
A ja jedno wiem na pewno, że jeżeli taki człowiek będzie stał na czele Ministerstwa Skarbu czy Najwyższej Izby Kontroli, to taki kraj będzie zdegenerowany. To państwo będzie chore.
But I know one thing for sure. If such people are heading, let's say, the Ministry of Treasury of the Supreme Control's Office in a country, then this country is absolute rubbish. It's the end for this country.
Dialog można prowadzić z kimś, kto jest gotów prowadzić dialog.
You can only have dialogue with somebody who is open to have a dialogue with you.
Ale jeżeli na moje argumenty on z kieszeni wyjmuje nóż, to koniec dialogu.
But if I present my arguments and the counterparty takes out a knife from their pocket, then that's the end of dialogue for me.
Albo jest to dialog z Miloszewiczem.
Or you are having a dialogue with Milosevic
W Srebrenicy.
in Srebrenica.
Yep.
If I may, I think
Please.
Accountability, the system we have created for politics to have accountability is simply, voters' right to vote and elect their representatives. So politics should be good, and politicians should behave in a good way, But unfortunately, maybe it's a strong word, now we have professional politicians, you see. Once there's a professional politicians, then the saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely kicks in. So the accountability, I think, if you cannot have partyless democracy, which the Tibetan democracy is, because no parties work for, party's interests, but it's individual politicians, rather member of parliament getting elected, and you serve your term. While you do that, it's case by case, you vote or you vote against. So there's a merit to it. Even if you cannot have that, to limit professional politicians, perhaps there should be a term limit. For president, 2 terms, prime minister, 2 terms. Even a member of parliament, after 2 terms, you must take 1-term break. Then you have a chance to get re-elected, right? So I think the term limit perhaps is the right way to go, because once the politicians become professional politicians, then you fall in wrong hands and you get influenced the wrong way. Because as Maya, the Prime Minister of Moldova, was saying, she said, there are some very capable judges and lawyers, but over time, they lost integrity and they became corrupt. Because the system made so. There was no accountability in the system. Perhaps term limit with a break might be a way to go forward. Maybe we have a minister from...
Another recipe. Well, one of my favorite Havel ideas is what he told a conference in Copenhagen in 1991. He said, when I became the president, I became suspicious to myself. And I so often think about this and think, if every politician told that to himself every morning when they get up, the world might be a better place.
You're right, but there are 2 things here. First, the business of running a country is a very serious business. And the problem with a lot of our countries, let's say new democracies, is that we also lack the other leg, so to speak, of government. And this is a professional, stable public administration. If you have a professional, quality public administration, politicians can change, come and go. They're the element of, let's say, accountability. But public administration is the element of continuity and of taking this business of running even a small country, taking this business seriously. Otherwise, it's really all entertainment. Because people come, they make, for instance, good campaign, they have great posters, their team is fantastic on social networks, and they get themselves elected. They have no clue what they should do. And this is a serious issue. This is really a serious problem. Again, if you have serious public administration, it doesn't matter so much. But if you don't, and I can tell you from personal experience, in a new democracy, let's say, like Croatia, being a minister is a hands-on job. You're actually doing something. You don't walk into your office and there are other people who knew from before or who know what you should do. You have to figure out how these things run, how they're done, what you should do. So, first of all, I would argue don't taint all the politicians with the same brush, because if you do, you will end with the worst. Because this is what the worst politicians are doing. They're trying to leave the impression that everybody is the same. So, the guy who is stealing, lying, misusing the government is the same as anybody else, and therefore you, dear citizens and the public, have no choice. So you can also elect me, who are, all these bad things. And this is why I think it's very important to distinguish. And another thing that, other point, if I may, and then I won't speak anymore, is that these modern totalitarians or dictators wannabes populists, as we call them, as an endearment, I would say. One thing that they're very keen on is to find a big divider for the society, to actually introduce something that would, turn you to them and us. And us can do no wrong, and them can do no right. And once this happened, you're cooked.
All right. I hate to interrupt this nice discussion, but I'm being reminded that our time is running short. Now, in the Václav Havel library, we don't have too many rules, but we have one iron rule, and that's the audiences get to speak. So now is the time for all of you to comment, ask questions, criticize, bring new recipes.
While prepared for a question, not answering to her, but just to say that I've also been, in some way, the politician.
Yes,
I'm
you
serving
are.
as the president of the Tibetan people. But the good thing was term limit, which I have. I'm in my second term. All the things that you want to do, you will do it based on what is just and what is right, because I don't have to worry about election. Yeah. If you're a professional politician, you constantly worry about your election rather than the service you have to provide to the people, So that's when you get trapped into other things.
Right. Now, I was also reminded that we're not handing mics to each other, we're throwing them at each other, so please.
So, hello, I will introduce myself. I'm Tatev Darjan from Armenia, and I will ask my question to my Armenian colleague here. So, in the light of the recent developments in Armenia, the Armenian revolution, I would like to know what kind of technique you will propose that the government and the people continue to be responsible to each other, because the government now owes its power to the people because it became government because of the people. So what do you think we can do as citizens to make sure that government is still responsible to its people? Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Please,
And I will use this chance also somehow to address the previous question. So what we see as a pattern also for these totalitarian regimes, that this concept of accountability and any mechanism that is there to ensure the accountability is fully destroyed, because the aim of such kind of politicians or professional politicians is to protect the group interest or to protect the oligarch group interest, to preserve the power and to maintain in a power more than one time. So this is also the pattern that we were seeing in all the countries and in particular in Armenia. And what followed after the revolution in the country, which is something that we didn't even imagine before, the second president of the country currently is accused for abusing the power. But as we see, these rules were changed in a way that from the formal legal perspective now it's very much complicated, and sometimes it seems impossible to really establish justice and to hold this person accountable for all the wrongdoings. So what would be my message to the new government of the Republic of Armenia, to the citizens of the country? So for the decision makers and for the new government, I think we need fully to destroy this old style of institutions where the concept of accountability is lost, and to really restructure the state institutions in a way that transparency and accountability is ensured. Through the education, we need to put a lot of stress on young people, educating responsible citizens for the country. So when they exercise their right to vote and when they act as citizens, they'll still preserve this concept of moral agents, taking care not only about their decisions for themselves, but also for any other member of society. So here, I think that we need to strengthen the concept of human rights. Equality is basis for that. When I act as a responsible citizen, I will not breach the rights of others, and through that concept also I take action to help my government accountable, whatever there is for me as a citizen.
Thank you, Heiko. Throw the mic.
Igor Blažević, a question for Vesna. Vesna, you have mentioned how basically devastating it is when populists and other forces succeed in a polarizing society. What is your advice, let's say, for the societies which have still not entrenched themselves in along the polarization lines, but are moving in that direction? Let's say, what are the appropriate civic action? What is appropriate political action to counter this development?
Oh. I think we have to start by understanding what is happening. And this kind of discussion, I think, helps a great deal, even it sometimes might sound tedious, but I think we have to start with that. I think we also have to think of massive civic education, democracy, liberal democracy. And let's not kid ourselves. The populists have figured out what they can sell as democracy. They can sell winning elections as democracy, nothing else. If I won the elections, I can do whatever I want. We know that this is not democracy, but this has become acceptable. So, in a way, electoral victory without any values. And therefore, I think it's extremely important that you have sort of this mass civic education where people would figure out what they're entitled to in this system. Continuous programs of social inclusion, because one of the things that happened, the civil society, in a way, changed. You know, the LGBT, women's movements, all of these movements, which we call the civil society, were fighting for inclusion. Now you started having movements, white supremacists, racists, nationalists, that are actually fighting for social exclusion. I can only be happy with this society if these guys are not part of it. So we have to think of these strategies of social inclusion as part of party politics and state politics. I have some other things, but I can see
I'm afraid this will be the last question. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is John Keane. I wanted to make two remarks to the panel. One is that it surprised me that the problem that first surfaced with Machiavelli wasn't discussed, that responsibility also includes the problem of the relationship between means and ends. And that's true in civil society, and it's also true in, so to say, high politics. That is part of responsibility. But the second thing is, if there were animals in this room, they would be shocked that there was not one mention of something very big that Václav Havel contributed to, something very big that happened in my lifetime, which is that responsibility in matters of politics, in the definition of democracy, has come to include responsibility of humans to the non-human. And there are many, many interesting things going on, not only green parties, but declaration of areas of nature that have legal status. I wondered whether one of you might venture to say something about this growing sense, unfinished sense, of human responsibility and the need to represent the non-human in public affairs.
Well, maybe that will be for you to...
As a Buddhist, we believe in sentient beings, you know, so which includes human and animals, including plants. So that's part of our ethos. That's why I was talking about responsibility being not just human responsibility, but also universal responsibility. But clearly, in the case of Tibet, the Chinese leaders are, at the moment, not only not taking care of non-humans, but we, the Tibetan human beings, are repressed in Tibet. So perhaps the human leaders should be taught the Václav Havel philosophy of responsibility and be accountable for their actions towards Tibetan people and Uyghur people, as you see in Hong Kong. So I think that will be the test of leaders, you know. So perhaps, as a Buddhist, I agree with you, but the problem that we see in the world is human creating more problems for human beings. That we need to address quite urgently.
Now, it's a fascinating subject, and I think it would be worth having a panel at the next Forum 2000 about our responsibility for the non-human part of the world, or the lack thereof. But I'm afraid we will not have time for it today. And I was tasked by the organizer that we should carry away 3 lessons learned or points of wisdom or something from this discussion. So there were more than 3, but if I should go for 3, so one is that was your contribution on the importance of education in responsibility. Although you pointed at the you only live once mentality, and I'm very happy to say that many of the young people today in this country, in Hong Kong, in Western Balkans, where we presented a group of young people a Human Rights Award recently for their activities, do not have that mentality and actually criticize us for having that mentality. So there is some hope in that. The other is term limits. That's a very practical suggestion. I don't think it will solve all problems in politics, but it's a good start. So let's start from there. And the third one I take from Vesna is the need to transcend the perspective of us and them. And Václav Havel was a great model in that respect. In his speeches right after the Velvet Revolution, he often reminded us that it was not us, the revolutionaries, who now had it right, and them, the totalitarians, who, you know, screwed it up, but that we were also a part, however small, of the system, and we all bore responsibility for what had happened and have to share that responsibility now. So on that note, thank you very much for this wonderful panel. Thank you, the audience, and thank the translator. Have a good afternoon.
Zdjęcie wszystkich panelistów teraz wspólne, na stojąco.